Hi, my name is Colby Byrne. I'm from Ridgewood, New Jersey, and today I'm going to be reading my short story, The Fog House, which was chosen for this year's winner of the Saints and Sinners Fiction Competition. I'm going to be starting from the beginning of my story. I had a new message from a girl calling herself Heath, short for Heathcliff, it turned out. She read a poem I posted on my blog when I was feeling self-indulgent and looking for the artistic validation my professors wouldn't give me. It was about myself, but also about Wuthering Heights, which I had just read in my Victorian literature course and was subsequently obsessed with. Not that I especially enjoyed the experience of reading the novel itself, it's just that I knew getting caught up in its gothic cult following would make me feel interesting. All over my little blog were images from different Wuthering Heights movies, countless quotes like Kathy's iconic, "He's more myself than I am," and clips from Kate Bush's music videos. And you can bet I was blasting that song on repeat. I loved showing off on my blog like that, looking more academic than I really was. Like I was the kind of person who could actually be touched by a work of literature, one from the 19th century, no less. Not many in my real life viewed me as an intellectual or even as artistic, just quiet. Here on my blog, with a decent audience, I was cultured, esoteric even. I like to think they pictured me like Kate Bush in that music video, with flowing see-through fabrics gracefully throwing myself onto a grassy hill. "He's so effervescent," they'd say. Heath's message read, "Beautiful poem. We are happy to find another looking for Emily's truth. Asterisk slash asterisk. Do you know about Fog, 1999? I loved her immediately. It felt like a major accomplishment that a person with such an ethereal messaging style and casual familiarity with the Bronte sister appreciated my work. I went to her blog. It had a black background and was programmed so the viewer's mouse looked like a single blinking eye when swept across the screen. I scrolled through her posts, a series of phone pictures taken of a grainy video game on a fancy TV, burning candles always lit on either side. Beneath each photo, there was no description, just a date. A photo had been posted every day for as far back as I bothered to scroll, and I scrolled for a while. The game on the screen always depicted the back of a male figure dressed in a black overcoat walking through a dense fog. Most of the shots were nearly indiscernible from one another, while some gave a better sense of the scenery this little man was traveling, filled with deep green hills and occasional stone paths. I opened a new tab and Googled "Fog Game 1999" and found a brief Wikipedia article about a Japanese video game very loosely based on Wuthering Heights, where you play as an exorcist in the moors, assisting various strangers haunted by ghosts. The game was never released outside of Japan. I messaged Heath back, trying to sound as cool as she did without looking like a poser. "Interesting. How did you find it? Your blog feels like a dream." Squiggly line. I felt self-conscious about the squiggly line, but decided not to think about it too much. Later that night, I got a response. Julia did. "There's a secret if your soul is open. We'd like to show you someday." Heath and I had a back and forth for about a month. It turned out she was living with her girlfriend Julia in a farmhouse in upstate New York. Julia's family was wealthy, and this past year they allowed her and Heath to move in there together. The two of them had recruited a few people over the course of the year to live as a unit in what they dubbed the Fog House. Why did they come there? To find Kathy. Julia was collecting like-minded people who were willing to follow her on a search for Kathy. In that sense, she was like Heathcliff pining after his beloved Kathy's ghost in the novel. But this was also different. Kathy isn't ghost. Kathy is really God. I'm sure most would have blocked her right then and there, but I decided to hear her out. I was a friendless college freshman at a big university then. My roommate was always out partying, and I spent most of my weekend nights reading blogs, drinking boxed wine until I threw up, taking Tums, and feeling sorry for myself. I've been on a range of antidepressants since middle school, when a severe case of social anxiety took over. I wouldn't talk to people unless directly approached, and even then I would resent a person for forcing me to engage. I could always find a reason why anything I was saying was wrong or disturbing, so I was constantly deleting sentences in my head midway through speaking them. Conversations would always end with a string of jumbled words floating in the air and my unsettled audiences excusing themselves politely. Over time, my anxiety became less severe, but that didn't mean my social life suddenly blossomed. Any hopes of making new and interesting friends in college were dashed, and by the time the spring semester of my freshman year began, I had come to terms with the fact that I was by nature a person meant to be alone. Fine. I believed in me, and my entire value system was based around that self-preservation. I liked to think of myself as someone who thought nothing mattered, But this was difficult to reconcile with the fact that I also mattered a whole fucking lot. In high school, I'd gone through brief stints of satanic worship to counter my parents' vehement Christianity, but I never had the discipline to stick with it. I disliked the idea of being led by the dark. I guess that's what drew me to Wuthering Heights. So did I think Julia and Heath were crazy for believing that God was hidden somewhere deep inside a bad video game? Who's to say? If God really was so elusive, why wouldn't Fog 1999 be the exact place to find him? Or her, rather. Loving Jesus stopped being edgy millenniums ago, so maybe these two figured out a nice alternative. I can't say that complimenting my poetry didn't sway me to give them the benefit of the doubt. The fog is endless. You run forever. When you stop running, God gives up on you. What happens when you find her? You can see. I told Heath my spring break was coming up, and she said Julia wanted to meet me. I bit the bullet and drove 6 hours to the fog house, thinking about the Amish a lot as I went through Pennsylvania. It was less of a farmhouse and more of a mansion with a barn. There were acres of open land, woods, and a long gravel driveway. I pulled up next to the house and got out of my car. Heath watched me from the porch, then walked over to stand about a yard from me, her hands crossed in front of her and her bare feet digging into one another. She had enormous curly hair in the middle part and dark circles under her eyes. She wore a billowing cotton black dress with a plaid red blanket draped across her shoulders. "You're tall," she shouted, as if she were very far away. She had an indiscernible accent and a look in her eyes that also felt distant. "Julia will be happy." She never smiled. I followed her in the side door of the house and was immediately struck by a burning herbal smell and sounds of a piano playing in the distance. There was a large circular table with several chairs surrounding it and a candelabra at its center. Heath took my bags from me and led me down a long, dim hallway. The walls were lined with watercolors on ripped sheets of paper, each portraying two eyes emerging from a gray mask that varied in size and intensity from painting to painting. We came to an open room with a high ceiling and wooden beams, and there was Julia, painting on an easel. She had straight dark hair tied in a ponytail and wore a white linen dress that looked expensive. In one hand was a crystal glass filled with bright pink liquid. When she noticed us, she stood up with a cheerful smile, put her glass down, and floated over on her bare feet. She embraced me and whispered in my ear, never turn your brights on in the fog." She pulled away to stare into my eyes, and I became paranoid that she saw something there. But then she laughed as if this whole thing were a joke, and downed the rest of her pink drink. "It's so nice to finally meet you." That was just an excerpt from my story. You can find the rest of it in the Saints and Sinners anthology. Thank you so much to the Saints and Sinners competition for choosing my story, and I look forward to seeing you all at SAS Fest, hopefully next year. All the best. Bye.
Hi there, I'm Laura Price Steele. My story, Marrow is the Bone, was a runner-up in the Saints and Sinners Fiction Contest. I'm going to read a small portion of that here. I'll just be starting right from the beginning. Ben's faster on the downhill than I am. He stands up on his pedals, puts his arms out straight, and coasts without touching the brake. I can't do that. I'm always feathering the levers, even when it makes my tires shudder and skid. The first time we ever rode together, he noticed me pulling up, and he yelled at me over his shoulder. The words were muffled by the distance, by the wind, but I could tell from the way the syllables looped that he was telling me to keep up. I tried my best to stop riding the brake, but the momentum terrified me. It felt like my skeleton was going to slide right out of my skin. Even at my fastest, I couldn't keep up with him. I was maybe 200 yards back when he fell. I heard it, the tumble of the bike, the spokes rattling, and the thump of a spilled body. The noise made my chest contract. Instinctively, I closed my hands around the brakes. The bike tipped forward like a threat, and so I opened my fist, let the wheels roll. Time elongated. I could feel the seconds stretch out like hot taffy. When I came upon him, Ben was sitting up. The bike had careened off the trail and landed in the thick bushes down near the creek bed. I came to a skidding stop. Ben peered up at me. His helmet was cocked to one side, and there was a smear of blood on his cheek. Of course, we'd looked each other in the eye before, but this time was different. His embarrassment and my fear stripped the pretense off everything. Pretense I hadn't even realized was there. "You okay, man?" I asked. He smiled, looked at his gloved hands. "I think so," he said. "What happened?" I asked. I expected him to take me through the play-by-play. That's the kind of guy he is. Everything is a story to him. Ben swung his gaze back up to meet mine, and I felt a crumpling in my chest. I fell, he said. His brow creased. He had one of those brows that was always creasing. I swung my leg over my bike and set the back wheel against a tree. You're bleeding, I said, looking at his cheek, but Ben glanced down at his shin. I took a step toward him and saw the thick red line on his leg. Without my bike in front of me, I didn't know where to put my hands. Ben picked up a smooth rock, pushed it against his ankle, and slid it up his leg so that the blood glommed onto it. Then he tossed the rock into the bushes. That made it worse. Now the blood and dirt was matted into his leg hair. Do you want to try to stand up? I asked. I held my hand out to him. Ben smiled. He had the disheveled but satisfied look of a kid who'd somersaulted down a hill for no reason. He glanced at my hand and reached for it. Ben and I had been working together for almost a year by then. We hung out sometimes outside of work. We'd grab a beer or go for a hike. We even planned to go skiing once, though we had to cancel when a windstorm kept the chairlifts from opening. But in all that time, all those hours unloading and scanning shipments at the warehouse, we'd never touched. That's what I realized when he reached out and grabbed my hand. It was the first time our bodies had ever come in contact. I pulled Ben to his feet. We let our hands unclasp, but still he was only a couple inches from me. I could feel the heat coming off of him. It was the first time I understood him as someone with a body. Fuck, he said, looking down toward his bike. I can get it, I offered. He shook his head and started down the slope. He had to wrestle with the bushes, which were so thick his top half looked like it was floating. I could hear the sticks breaking against his legs. He swore, hissing through his teeth. I sidestepped down a few paces and held my hand out, and he rolled the bike into it. Ben made a show of riding the rest of the way back to the trailhead, though the bike was making a rubbing noise, like the tires were no longer set right. It was easy to keep up with him now, but I couldn't tell if he was riding more cautiously or if his bike just wouldn't fly like it used to. He dropped me off in the parking lot of my apartment. I pulled my bike off the top of his car, and he got the front wheel out of the trunk for me to reattach. I bent over for a second to set the floor on right, and when I stood up, Ben clapped me on the back. It was not something he'd ever done before. Thanks, man, he said, leaving his hand on my shoulder. I thought for a second that he might lean in and hug me, but then his hand slid away. You better clean yourself up, I said. He had a smear of blood on his cheek, but I couldn't tell where it had come from. The wife will love that, he said, looking down at his leg. A beat of silence slipped by. I smiled. See you Monday, I said, and I pulled my bike up on the curb. Thank you, Saints and Sinners. Hope to see you at the festival next year.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hines, coming to you from my home in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I will be reading an excerpt of my short story, Ready, which was a runner-up in the Saints and Sinners fiction competition. Pedro stared at himself in the bathroom mirror in the hotel suite, floors above the ballroom where he was about to get married. He thought of the bodies rushing around below him, florists and caterers, hurrying to get it all just right. He thought about the people and all the florists stacked between him and his wedding. He wondered what they were doing at this exact moment. Were they laughing, crying, making love? Then he flattened the lapels of his suit, applied some cologne, and thought about his father. As he made his way down the corridor, he was struck by a sense of déjà vu. Not the exact moment, but the feeling. The stomach like the hive of bees, the cold damp of his hands, the fear that comes from something so personal being so public. He was admittedly a little bit distracted when he reached his mother's door. Otherwise, he would have waited for a response when he knocked, a gentle tap, rather than just pushing the not quite latched door open and walking right in. Had he not been so lost in thought, he might have called out or heard something that gave him pause, but instead he happened unannounced upon his mother and his bride-to-be. There they were, the two women he loved most in the world, wrapped in lace and tulle and smelling like all the flowers in a garden. They quickly broke apart, eyes wide and bodies stiff with surprise. Dust motes danced in the empty space between them. The only things moving in a room were just a moment ago, silhouetted by soft light filtering through the curtains. They had been delicately leaning into each other, kissing. Pedro's father loved music, clothes, and making his mother laugh. Whenever Pedro thought about him, Sam Cooke's You Send Me, Chanel Blue, and his mother's smile all came to him at once. Even as a memory, the man was a sensory experience. Pedro always knew his mother and father's relationship was different. While his friend's parents seemed to have all this space between them as they passed in the same room or between the words spoken at the dinner table, his had proximity. Even as a little boy, he recognized being outside of it. His parents loved him, but he was one step removed from their closeness. If asked to describe his childhood before, it would have been a loop of perching on the kitchen counter, his mother making tamales, and his father dancing around her, twirling her, dipping her, a smile and a laugh that spread all the way to her eyes. The only time his parents seemed tense was when they were inviting outsiders in. Pedro didn't understand why they put themselves through it, and even asked once, but his father just gave him a wink and said, "How will all the ladies know how handsome you are if we don't have them over?" And Pedro laughed like it was a game because he wanted his father to believe it. As his parents got ready, they grew quiet. His mother would put on clothing she never wore, long skirts and sleeves, high collar, and wipe the red from her mouth and the shadow from her eyes. Pedro sat on the bathroom counter, watching her doll herself, not understanding. While his father got dressed in one of his many beautiful suits, Pedro's mother dressed him. He knew she hated getting ready for these things, but he loved it because he got to dress just like his father. He still remembered going with his father to the tailor, standing still and getting poked with pins, feeling the weight of the fabric on his shoulders as the tailor and his father discussed the break of the pants and the hit of the cuff, the air smelling faintly of chalk, the whole thing a ceremony. Once he was dressed and hair parted and glossy with pomade, his mother would usher him back into their bedroom. His father would turn, smiling and nodding. "Okay, amigo, I see. And then he'd do the high five that ended with a snap, and then he'd turn to Pedro's mother and say, "Wait, something is missing, no?" And she would stand back and look at him like she was solving a puzzle, and then snap her fingers. She would go to her father's vanity and hold out the midnight blue bottle. "A gentleman must smell nice too, no?" And then she would spray it into the air, and Pedro would walk into the cloud, feeling the soft kiss of vapor on his skin. On this particular night, right as this moment passed, the first guest arrived. The doorbell was like a foreman entering the room. In an instant, Pedro's father transformed from lithe and fluid to rigid and solid. His mother went from relaxed and confident to erect and uncertain. Pedro looked from his mother's face to his father's, their eyes saying, "We are brave." And the early moments of that dinner party felt like all the others. Husbands and wives arrived together, men all in suits, women dressed just like his mother. The men peeled off to join his father around the bar cart, the women headed to the kitchen. Pedro stood suspended in the middle, caught between his obligation to be a man and his desire to be where all the warmth was. And then he appeared, a nightmare in Pedro's living room. Mr. Brennan was a serious man with a square jaw and severe haircut. Pedro had only seen him once before when he came to speak to their class. He talked a lot about the country and how it had been dangerous and full of sin. He said a lot of those words that stung like lemon juice, things that Pedro didn't understand but that made him feel sad and alone. When he got home from school that day, he cried until his mother's blouse was wet with tears. When his body had finished heaving, his mother took his face in her hands and said, "Mi cielo, my sky. Everything feels sad and alone. Everyone feels sad and alone. Some people feel it inside like you and me. Some run from it. Running from it can look all kinds of ways. Sometimes it looks like eating too much. Sometimes it looks like spending too much. Sometimes it looks like hurting yourself. People like Mr. Brennan are the saddest kind. They're the ones who are so lonely and afraid they have to take things from other people to feel brave. We should always find love in our hearts for people like Mr. Brennan because they need it the most, and we have bravery to spare." The men filtered into the dining room and positioned themselves at alternating seats. Pedro's father at the head, he was the first to take a seat, and then the other men followed in unison. Only then did the women emerge from the kitchen and take their seats to the left of their respective husbands. The table was filled with platters of roasted meat, buttery potatoes, and fresh baked bread, all favorites of their guests. Although this food was much more decadent than their usual fare, Pedro found himself daydreaming about the smoky flavors and savory sweet richness they usually ate. He knew that this, the way that they were eating now, was better than the way they ate every day. He knew it had something to do with the people here being better than they were, but it was all very confusing. How do you reconcile something worse being better just because someone tells you so? It seemed like someone else was always deciding what was good and what was bad. While Pedro had been daydreaming, his father had led the table in prayer. The room filled with the sounds of silver scraping porcelain and please pass the potatoes and the soft thud of platters returning to the tabletop. Pedro looked up to find Mr. Brennan sitting quiet as the sound reverberated around him. Quiet like the forest before the report of a rifle. Quiet like the stillness between heartbeats. Pedro kept returning to his mother's words, and as the evening wound to a close, he went to search out Mr. Brennan. He wasn't sure why or what he would do when he found him, but he thought maybe he could share some kindness, some courage. Mr. Brennan wasn't in the living room with the few remaining guests. He wasn't in the kitchen or the bathroom. Pedro figured he must be collecting his and his wife's coats. As Pedro got closer to the coat room, he caught a whiff of his father's cologne, but maybe he was just smelling himself. Just outside the door, he heard a whisper. His father's. Then another voice, a man's, soft and tender like the purr of a cat. Pedro didn't know this was a moment that meant more than any other, so he walked right into the coat room. First, he saw his father's back, his navy suit and oil-black hair. Then he was staring straight into the eyes that belonged to the second voice, a voice Pedro had only known to say cruel things, a voice that lived inside a man who was too lonely to be brave, a lonely man wrapped tenderly around his father. So that was a little bit of my story ready. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much to Saints and Sinners for acknowledging it and including it amongst the other amazing entries this year. And I hope to see you all next year.
Hi there, I'm J.R. Greenwell here in my old Kentucky home. And today I'll be reading a few pages from my short story, The Plump Cousins from Johnson City. And I'll begin with when Brody Whitaker, a 7-year-old Appalachian sissy boy from eastern Kentucky, meets his cousins for the very first time. And I hope you enjoy. Mama looked up to the house. Brody Josiah Whitaker, come on out here and meet Aunt Rita and your cousins. I stood frozen, not sure how to meet these long-lost kin. I opened the door and walked slowly onto the porch and then down the steps, scanning their faces for some kind of friendly gesture to keep me moving forward down the path. Rita held out her arms and called me over. Look at you, my little red-headed nephew. And look at those brown eyes as black as coal. I've waited all these years to finally meet you for the first time and put my arms around you. She squeezed me so hard that I almost lost my breath. She smelled good, like nothing I'd smelled before. Maybe a fancy perfume or a sweet-smelling soap, or perhaps she just smelled good in a natural way. In a quick second, I realized the aroma filling my crushed nostrils was a combination of body odor and apple pie. I wanted to lick that melted morsel I spotted on her collar, but she released me before my tongue could touch the fabric. She introduced me to the stout man with the rolled-up sleeves and thinning hair. Fred was his name, and he was her husband. Why are you wearing black shiny shoes, I asked. It ain't Sunday. He laughed. The only ones I've got. He then leaned over me and said, no, I got more, but you Aunt Rita wanted me to wear my good shoes when we came to visit. And these young boys, Aunt Rita said as she turned around like a cow showing off her newborn calf to the rest of the herd, are your cousins. This is Junior, and he's 12, and this one here is my baby boy, Tommy. He just had a birthday last month, and he's now 10 years old. They looked at me like no one had ever looked at me before, with frowning eyebrows, terse lips, and noses turned up. Come on, boys, say hello to Brody. They obliged their mother with a forced smile and a low-volume hey. After the introductions, I couldn't remember the cousins' names as I fixated on the size of these two who were just a tad older than me. Whenever Mama had me select a hen for supper, she always had to pick out the plump one. These two had plenty of plumpness going on. Why are you dressed like that? Little Plump blurted out as he pointed at me. I instinctively moved over to my mother's side, leaning on her, wondering why he would ask such a question. And why are you wearing a pink apron? Little Plump's bigger brother, Real Plump, asked. His comment left me a bit confused. Was he questioning why I was wearing an apron, or was he objecting to the color? Boys, mind your manners, Aunt Rita snapped. It's cute on him, she said, trying to reassure me that she was okay with me wearing my mama's old ratty apron made from floral print seed bags. And what are those furry little things you got on there? Them's rabbit feet, I explained with excitement. Mama's been teaching me how to sew, and Daddy's been showing me how to clean and gut squirrels and rabbits. When Mama got a new apron from Daddy on her birthday, she gave me this one and I fixed it up. Sewed them rabbit's feet along the front side and down the edges. Waste not, want not, that's what Daddy always says. And then I took these squirrel's tails and sewed them onto this rag that I'm wearing on my head. That way I can pretend I got long hair, that is if I want to. Aunt Rita touched the fabric on my head. And did you sew these designs on there too? Looks like mighty fine needle pointing. Yes, ma'am. Mama lets me use her special sewing needle and she gives me any leftover threads after darning. Don't know much about needle pointing. I just sew like I'm darning and I make shapes. Them's supposed to be stars. Boys ain't supposed to sew, that's for girls, Real Plump commented with an air of contempt. Well, even before Aunt Rita had a chance to stop her son from throwing one more insult at me, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I looked at Real Plump straight in the eyes and said with certainty, "It don't say in the Bible that boys can't sew." You ain't read the whole Bible and you probably can't read either. Well, I'm learning to read, but even if I can't, my mama would have told me if it was in the Bible or not, and she ain't told me. Fred wiped his brow again. Well, looks like we got us a couple of feisty cousins here, don't we? Guess it runs in the family, Aunt Rita chuckled. Real Plump and I locked eyes as Mama pulled me back. I knew right then and there I didn't like him, and I sensed the feeling was mutual. And we're going to stop there. I just want to say thank you to Saints and Sinners for including me into as a finalist and be printed in this publication. And I hope that we can all get together in New Orleans in 2022. Goodbye.
Hi there, I'm Aaron Hamburger coming to you from Washington, D.C. I'll be reading an excerpt from my story, My Darling Socialist. When they drove me up to Ann Arbor, my parents warned me to resist the temptation to follow the latest intellectual fads, politically correct nonsense like Adam and Steve instead of Adam and Eve, or using the title Ms. with women's surnames. As a reminder to stay true to my ideals, they gave me a present, a copy of the play A Man for All Seasons. In my dorm room, Mom kissed my cheek, then searched my face. I know I'm forgetting to tell you something, but I can't remember what. Dad patted my arm and said, "Keep your nose out of the bars." Then they left me to unpack. I sat on the bed and surveyed my stuff, crammed into plastic crates, duffel bags, and boxes, as well as A Man for All Seasons. Finally, I thought, fuck it, and went out to look at men. In Ann Arbor, I had my choice of men to look at, and they were all handsome. Or even if they weren't handsome, they were handsome by virtue of their being there. I loved the texture of their hair, their bright eyes and curled lashes, and the contours of their noses and jaws, milky and clean-shaven, or deeply tanned like polished wood, or dusky and speckled with facial hair. I loved their rough, capable fingers and oddly delicate ears. I loved the smooth planes of their chests and the curves of their hips and butts. I loved their meaty legs and surprisingly slim, even dainty feet. I loved their deep, craggy voices echoing down dormitory halls or through the trees of our central quad. I wasn't sure what else I wanted to do besides stare at men, though I knew all the words for guys who stared at other guys. I had heard my dad use those words to describe the effeminate owner of the boys' clothing store where Mom used to buy my gear for summer camp. But I didn't know if those words applied to me. Or maybe I did know, but I didn't want to know. One of the men I particularly enjoyed staring at was the TA who led the discussion section of my Intro to American History lecture. His name was Richard. Not Rick or Rich or even Dick. Richard. I wasn't entirely sure what a TA was, or why one person might be a TA with a 20-person discussion session and the other might be a professor with a 300-person lecture. But I knew I liked looking at him. Richard was a tall blond man with broad shoulders and a handsome pale face whose blank expression invited me to study it further, to guess at his thoughts. He always wore the same outfit, jeans and a white button-down shirt. They might have been the same jeans and shirt, or perhaps he had a closet full of old jeans and white shirts. Either way, his clothes always looked worn and too tight, hugging the lines of his legs and butt. His shirt buttons strained to stay closed across his chest, and I kept wishing they'd pop open. Poor Richard would stand in front of our classroom, lean against the chalk railing of the blackboard, his pretty face and muscular poem of a body barely moving as he droned in a whispery voice about labor movements, the social contract, or the Annales school of historians. He'd ask pointless open-ended questions like, how does the message of the Wobblies resonate today? Or, do you see how despite the prevailing rhetoric of equality, America has always been ruled by a powerful oligarchy reinforcing pre-existing social structures? Usually I was the only one who answered, partly out of pity, partly so Richard would notice me. The Wobblies are like labor unions today. Or, this is just a guess, but is that kind of like corporate lobbies donating to politicians to advance their agendas? And one time I said, nice shirt. This when Richard wore a pale blue shirt instead of his usual white. He blushed and said thanks. During those pregnant pauses, while Richard waited for someone, anyone, well, for me to speak up, sometimes I'd prolong the silence so I could draw him in my notebook. Richard had a noble profile, like the image of Sir Thomas More on the cover of A Man for All Seasons, and I imagined he was a lion-hearted prince with an ancestral castle in England where we could live together and I could look at him to my heart's content. I will stop there. I was very excited to be a finalist and have my story published in the 2021 Saints and Sinners Fiction Anthology. I hope to see you all in New Orleans very soon. Be well. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Sam Nullman. I'll be reading an excerpt from my story, A Guide to Whatever This Thing Is, and I'll be starting from the beginning. After the website has approved your new photos, enter tops and versatile tops in the search bar like you do every day. Through sunken, half-closed eyelids, scroll through the litany of men looking to penetrate a hole, any hole. Bored, click on profiles of boys whom you barely find attractive. Message them hi, or sup, or less subtle, wanna fuck? Vacantly fiddle with your perfunctory erection while you peruse, yawning at your computer screen. Roll your eyes at the noises of your roommate through the wall, laughing with the incessant morning happiness of a girl who has a boyfriend. Glare daggers at the wall as if she can somehow sense your frustration through the sheetrock, and as if you can stop her from being happy for the good of the apartment as a whole. Keep scrolling. Your phone buzzes. Glance at it. Ignore the text from the boy that fucked you yesterday. It was okay, but you don't feel he deserves a repeat performance. Feel slightly flattered, however, that he wants your ass again this soon. You have a message on the website. Open it. It is from a semi-blurry, seemingly semi-handsome man with the screen name Bucket Man. He asks what you're into. Reply, getting fucked in any and every position imaginable. Turn away for a moment and take a sip of water from your nightstand. Stare out the window and feel your body turning inward like the implosion of a star. You feel a sneeze coming. Let it come. It won't come. Fuck. You hate that. Now you really are depressed. Bucket Man writes back. He says, get over here right now. And beneath that, his address in the financial district. Remember that you are a hole, any hole. Walk to the train and feel empty. Sit on the train and feel tired. Walk from the train to his building and feel nothing. Notice as you enter the elevator and press the button for the 16th floor that the building must have been designed for rich dickheads and that you are most likely about to get plowed by one. Walk through the cold modern metallic hallways to the door and knock. Sigh and fidget with your keys in your pocket. He answers the door, smiling, overly friendly. Hi! And invites you inside. His teeth are large and white like a chipmunk's. His gums are long and his upper lip doesn't cover it up all the way. He is far more handsome than you expected. Tall, lanky, chiseled jaw with 5 o'clock shadow. He radiates joviality, and it forces a slight yet sincere smile out of you. Feel your numbness melt in his presence as you forget everything. The apartment is bare, though nice. You only have a few seconds to look around because his tongue is already in your mouth and his hands are squeezing your ass. Kiss him back, hard. Put your hand on his hardening cock over his pants and rub. Allow him to undress you and toss you on the bed. His cock is pretty. Suck it. He makes loud, appreciative moans, and you like this. Put a condom on him. Notice his sexy and slim body while he fucks you on your back, harder and harder. Feel inadequate as you look down at your own body and can't help comparing. He announces he is about to come. Command him to come inside you. He does. His body convulses. He shouts in orgasm, and you like this. Now you come. Laugh. Both of you laugh, like, haha, can you believe we just did that goofy thing with our bodies? He kisses you, and you like this. He flops down onto his back and says, I'm very glad you came over. Me too. Exchange names. Laugh about how this stranger just came inside you, but you waited until afterwards to get each other's names. Roll your eyes, but on the inside where he can't see, at the fact that you've shared this post-fuck name exchange chuckle with many a man before him. He asks, "Are you a student?" Say yes and tell him about your major and try not to look too bored. Ask him, "What do you do?" "I'm a chef." "Well, I'm going to be a chef. Right now, I guess I'm more of a line cook." Wonder how much money line cooks make, but don't ask. Now make a joke, any joke. Show him you're funny and worthy. He laughs a real laugh. He jokes back. He's semi-funny too, though not as funny as you, and you like this. You must always be the funny one. He just needs to laugh along and keep up. Talk about TV shows you like. His jaw drops as you tell him that you like that one show. Nobody likes that one show. You tell him about more shows and movies you like, and he can't believe that you both have the same taste, the same sense of humor, because, like, what a rarity for two people to enjoy things that, up until now, felt specifically made for you alone. He tells you that he is here visiting for a specific job at a fancy restaurant before he goes back to culinary school in Napa Valley at the end of the year. Try not to look disappointed. You just met him. Wait 2 days. You're at your friend's apartment while they play video games. Casually scroll through your phone and come across his number, which he gave you before he left his place. Call him. Feel bold and different for doing this. You've never done this. He picks up with that convivial hi, and you light up inside a little. Cut to the chase. "Hey, would you want to go on a date?" "Yes, I absolutely would." Make plans to go to that nice barbecue place down the street from you. Notice that his voice, now isolated from his body, sounds kind of Valley Girl. Decide you don't care. You used to care, but now you know better than to care about something as silly as a feminine voice. But then wonder, is it that his voice was girly, or that it sounded like a specific kind of girl that you find unappealing? Don't think too much about how awful you're being. Hang up and rejoin your friends. Spend a little more time in your outfit and ask your roommate what she thinks of it. She runs her fingers through your hair and gives you a thumbs up. You hear knocking. Check yourself in the mirror one last time. Answer the door. He is there to walk you to the restaurant, even though it's only 1 block away. Your smile grows wider. You feel like a proper lady on a proper date, even though you're both men and you've already exchanged fluids. He's wearing a nice vertical striped button-down. His hair is hardened into porcupine spikes by too much gel. It reminds you of the Guidos from back home that you hated. Order a drink because he ordered a drink. Order a side because he ordered an appetizer. Mimic his order for an entree. He's been here before and you haven't. Hope against hope that he pays for all of this. Tell more jokes. He laughs and his laugh is real. Make him like you. You can see that he likes you, but really drive it home. Make yourself sparkle. Make your personality explode like a fucking H-bomb. Obliterate him. Brandish your comic ability like a poisonous blade and infect him with adoration. You are killing this. You can see in his eyes that you are killing this. Fuck, he's got gorgeous eyes. Even despite the terrible hairstyle, he's so very attractive to you. Handsome and laughs at your jokes, he may be perfect. And I'll stop there. Thank you to Saints and Sinners for including my short story in your new fiction edition. Be well.
Hi, my name is Patrick Earl Ryan. I'm going to be reading from my short story Pineapples. This is from the end of the story. It's about a narrator who has a questionable moral compass. And he's gotten himself into a little bit of a problem with the nephew of his best friend, Annie. So that's where we're going to pick up. Thank you for listening. Dark oaks bow low, inches above the many cars squeezed into every parking space along Lucas's street. Foregoing an invitation to the pool party, I only pull in front of the driveway, set the brake, and turn off the car. The engine still creaks and sets. The fuzzy yellow glow from Lucas's crisscrossed party lights leaves everything else in murky blues. Nothing I can say will change things, not that I even know which words would, and words push out of my chest and swell up in my mouth. His youth frightens me. His youth leaves him emotionable and unreasonable. His youth can be wielded, protects him. I didn't mean to scare you, I blurt. I just thought I wasn't planning to, but he leaves. Halfway across the yard, he turns back to me, frowns and waves, a folding of fingers, without lifting his arm, without drying his wet-cheeked, red-eyed face. His deepness and sincerity baffle me. His emotions seem so swollen and tender. I feel guilty for judging, but his distress feels so enormous for the smallness of our afternoon. I wave and try to grin, but it probably looks like a wince. He's already inside his house by the time Annie sachets to the car window with a cat's grin. "Babe, come have a sangria." I answer, "Oh, no, I shouldn't stay parked." "Just come grab a to-go cup," she insists. No, it wouldn't, I try. What might seem like uncertainty on my face offers her an invitation to ensnare me. You totally flaked on me today. You always flake on me. Come on, you owe me. I have your favorite. By the time I'm lured to the sidewalk by guilt and the sleek, tight joint she tucked between her tits, she's already pranced back to the fence to drag her salt and pepper-haired doctor away from his chatty crowd. No, 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 you have to come meet him now, I hear her implore in her sing-songsy, tipsy voice. I wish to myself that Lucas doesn't see me. If he likes you, then we're golden, she promises him. But it's Fred, Lucas's father, I hear above everyone else. Hey! There's a long grunt. Hey, pervert! A hush mushrooms around him as he stomps toward me. It doesn't seem like a joke. Hey, don't walk away from me! He yells. I don't think I'm moving. What did you do? His voice cracks. What did you do to my son to make him cry? He can float away with all of that anger in his chest. He's already answered his question. No matter my friendship with Annie, persuaded by some unshakable emotion, all of me, inside and out, shrinks away from him and the attention he's drawn. I feel his accusations branded into my forehead. Someone says, "Come on, guys, kids are here." I should run. But Margie, Lucas's mother, comes out too. She reaches out her little hand to hold him. I even hold my breath. He jerks his shoulder away. You said you wouldn't, she tries repeatedly, pleads with the back of his head, his red face and his tight jaw. She steps between us. Just go, she orders me. You need to get away from here, Evan. I'm sorry, please, just go, really. Go. It won't get better. Mouth agape, Annie strides up, the frilly ends of her long black skirt catching on the hedges, and is met with a shaky roar. Stay out of this, Annie. It's none of your business. Then he points at me. You don't get to mess around with my son. I know what you fucking freaks do. Hey, come on, this isn't the right time, someone says. You don't get to touch my son. Can someone go get Uncle Jim? Someone else says. Fred, baby, what are you doing? You don't need to do this. This is Annie's friend. We know Evan. Fuck Annie's friends. I can't even speak. Another voice. Hey, come on now. Hey, hey. The warm heft of his fist into my face surprises me. I can't even say whether he struck my nose, my cheek, my jaw. My face caves beneath thick bones. A swollen shock. The forest explodes in my ears, like falling through the surface of water, like the Gulf's wide waves crashing into my head. I spin, my ankles twist, my heels slip out. The cool sidewalk, that memory of cool asphalt of a schoolyard. The cement vibrates with my bones. Then the hard toe of his shoe kicks me again. I even wonder how I feel so little. It's Annie's voice I hear shouting, "Stop it! No, Fred, stop it! You're hurting him!" Already, my eyebrows feel swollen 3 times larger, and I can only see blurs of grays and browns, save for the 2 pineapple lights shimmering above my head, multiplying into 4, then 8, back again to those 2 yellow eyes. Those eyes, if only I can just lock on to them like a lover's gaze and never look away. Thank you for listening. I hope to see y'all next year for the Saints and Sinners Festival, and I hope you enjoyed the reading.
Hi, I'm Carrie Smith, and I'm coming to you from New York City, and I'm going to read to you the first few pages of my short story, Two Sides, a finalist in this year's Saints and Sinners Fiction Contest. Just to save you some guesswork, the story takes place in Michigan in the early 1970s. I hope you enjoy it. Two Sides. Tamisha was winning again, but I didn't care. I just wanted to keep the game going as long as I could, our bodies hunched forward and our faces so close I could feel the slight current of her breath between us as we studied the board. It was her move again, and she took her time playing out the consequences, seeing more of the future than I ever could. Finally, she sat up, tall and resolute. I followed her hand to the board. Her thumb and forefinger delicately lifted a knight, held it in the air, and set it down again. Check. I wanted those fingers to reach out to me. Did she know it? Did she feel that too? I was in the 10th grade at a private high school that, according to my father, cost a pretty penny, but would save me from being bused to the inner city if Milliken versus Bradley made its way to the Supreme Court and the justices made the wrong call on cross-district integration. He and my mother now believed I was rubbing elbows with the offspring of influential Grosse Pointe families, Fords, Chryslers, Dodges. Those kids had all learned to swing their field hockey sticks together in lower school. They didn't need any new friends like me, a middle-class kid with no pedigree, a wiffle ball player. I felt more at ease with Tamisha, an 11th grade scholarship student. Every day after the last bell, we went up to the second floor classroom where the chess club met. We were always the last to leave, fastened to our seats until the sky was ink black through the windows, and the only other people up there were Miss Ferguson, the old Latin teacher, and the janitors buffing the floors. Like Miss Ferguson, I guess, Tamisha and I had nowhere better to be. That September, my sister had left for college. My father had become an administrative law judge for workers' comp hearings, and my mother had been voted onto the local teachers' union bargaining committee, which meant she had meetings after her regular school day ended. Every evening, when we came home from our separate worlds, my father would say, "Where shall we have dinner tonight, Lo?" On this Monday night, my mother said, "Cavan's Bar and Grill." As we drove there through the November darkness, I thought of Tamisha driving home in her grandmother's beat-up Ford Falcon. Tamisha and her grandmother lived in Highland Park, far from Grosse Pointe. "How was school?" my mother asked as we waited in line to be seated. "Great," I said. "You played chess again?" I nodded. "Who's in that chess club anyway?" "Oh, lots of kids," I said, and she didn't dig any deeper. When we finally got to our table, my father leaned forward and told her, "Have I got some news?" His eyes darted to the other tables. "John Marlin is missing." John Marlin was my father's friend from Wayne State University Law School. "Missing?" said my mother. "What do you mean missing?" My father frowned. "Keep your voice down low. You never know who's listening. Let's use first initials." "How did you find this out?" she whispered. "L called my office this morning." L was Linda, John Marlin's wife. Until their marriage a year ago, he'd been a confirmed bachelor, according to my mother. "I don't know what he sees in that girl," my father had said when their wedding invitation arrived in our mail. "She's hardly a looker." "Oh, she's perfectly nice, Jim," said my mother. "And if you ask me, I don't know what she sees in him. He's a good 15 years older than she is." "I'll tell you what she sees. $signs and a rescue from old maid status. Either that, or she's got skills we don't know about." He laughed loudly. A Cavan's waitress set 3 vinyl-covered menus on the table. My father grinned up at her. "Are you our girl tonight?" Girl? I wanted to disappear. He read her name tag. "Charisse, is it, or Cheris?" "Whichever you prefer." She didn't smile, her head cocked to one side, eyes narrowed. My mother sat through this cringy exchange with a blank expression. My father always treated waitresses as if their job gave him license to tease and flirt, but Charisse, or Cheris, was no high school girl, and she gave him a look that said, "I know your type." "Start you off with a drink?" she asked flatly. "Coffee for me," said my mother. "Decaf," said my father. "Make sure it's decaf. I don't want to be up all night." Cheris, or Charisse, turned away, and my mother said, "Do you think Jay and Elle had a fight?" I asked her that, but she insisted everything was fine between them. I sipped my water and sucked on little chips of ice, the way I'd sucked on one of Tamisha's butterscotch lifesavers during our chess game an hour ago. As I opened my menu, I pictured John Marlin's face. His cheeks were scarred with little pockmarks, and the fringe of bangs across his forehead made him look like a Roman emperor. His eyes were the same blue as my grandmother's Wedgwood china. He wasn't handsome, but he was tall and striking in the expensive suits he wore to my parents' holiday parties. Tamisha was more than striking. She had dark almond-shaped eyes, high cheekbones, and full lips that I couldn't stop staring at. She wore her hair in tight braids that almost came to her shoulders. She was beautiful, and I could look at her forever. I'll stop there. Thanks, Saints and Sinners, for choosing my story to be included in the 2021 Fiction Anthology. I hope to see you all at next year's festival.
Hey everybody, my name is Chris Smith. I live here in New Orleans and I work at Jefferson Parish Public Library. I have been going to Saints and Sinners for many, many years. In fact, I think I've only missed the first one. I have a story that's coming up in the 2022 Saints and Sinners anthology. It's called Lucky Bastard, and I'm going to read a little bit for you. And so here goes. The Lucky Bastard. Just as he slid the key into the door lock, it dawned on Clay that he should have informed his roommate last week that he was going away for the weekend. When he gently swung the door open, a newspaper rustled, probably one that Lily, his roommate and old high school pal, had been reading. It occurred to him that she might be rolling it up to hit him. "Clay Bird, where have you been?" Lily lowered the paper and was looking over it with a scowl on her face. "Nowhere," he said, "just out." He made it sound as if he had gone down to the corner market to snag a cherry mash candy bar. "All weekend?" she asked. "How does that happen?" "I can't tell you how many people I called trying to track you down." She'd been lying on the couch, but had risen when Clay entered the room. She was wearing a black muumuu with purple, green, and red trim that made her look bigger than she was. Clay surmised that she hadn't been out of the apartment all day, but her makeup had been applied and hair pulled back. She'd been a beauty queen in her youth, but had never advanced far because of her Rubenesque physique. She was still attractive with smooth, unblemished skin and deep brown eyes. Clay suspected he'd be grilled on his whereabouts. He knew she'd disapprove. "I went to a seminar in Baton Rouge," he confessed, and rubbed the top of his head, like someone who'd bumped into a low-hanging sign. "That Louise Hay seminar you told me you were going to?" she asked, but it was more of a statement than a question. Her eyes had closed into horizontal slits. Clay and Lily had been through many arguments about Louise Hay and her self-help techniques. Lily thought Hay's theories that positive thinking could heal disease were dangerous and fraudulent. She didn't care if they were sweeping the country or not. Clay wanted to believe Louise Hay was a godsend. She had a big following among gay men who turned to her holistic strategies to fight HIV. "No harm in checking it out," he said. He felt like a child who'd been caught stealing candy from the drugstore. "I went with some of the guys from the Skylark Writers Group." "Oh, Clay," she sighed. "Why are you wasting your money on that nonsense? It's just a ripoff." "That's your opinion," Clay murmured. A negative thought, he told himself. He closed his eyes and visualized himself writing Lily's comments on a piece of toilet paper and flushing it down the toilet. "This past weekend has been something important for me. I feel changed." "How so?" Contempt filled her voice. "Well, I learned that I can improve my own health by being gentle and kind and patient." He pointed his nose at Lily when he said this. "What else did you learn?" Lily asked. Clay sighed. "I learned that I need to stop criticizing myself and others because criticism never solves a thing," he said, hoping she couldn't miss the message. "I learned that I need to forgive myself and let the past go." "You had to go to an expensive seminar 90 miles away to learn that," she uttered. "I could have told you that for free." He shot her a wicked side glance. She just couldn't see what he'd experienced. How could she? She was as jaded as he'd been, hadn't learned yet how to love herself as he was learning to do. "Lily," he said, "I just want to try and live a more truthful life. I want to be more honest, and I want to grow up." She maintained a blank stare. Was she beginning to understand, or was she just indulging him? For a minute, he wondered if she was going to dismiss this conversation and return to her newspaper. He wanted to tell her about the workshops, how to lovingly release old negative patterns, how to praise yourself and avoid criticism that breaks down the inner spirit, how to look into the mirror and express the love one has for oneself. He also wanted to tell her about that seminar on nutrition and wellness, and how he intended to create a plan that would bring him back to optimum health. But not right now. He was tired and she wasn't ready. She was too negative. "So, Mr. Honesty," she said, "in this new life of yours, do you plan to tell your dad that you and I are merely roommates and not the heterosexual couple he thinks we are? He paused. Yes, I intend to do that. And do you also plan to tell him that you're gay? She asked. Yes, I'll do that too, he replied. And do you also plan to tell your father that you happen to be HIV positive? She asked. Clay sighed. I plan to tell him everything. Do you think you'll do it this upcoming weekend? She asked. Why do I have to do it this weekend? He replied. For the first time, Clay felt like he had been caught in a trap. Because while you were away on your little Louise hayride, your dad called several times and wanted to speak to you, she said. He wants you to come home next weekend. He was very insistent. Clay sucked in a gulp of air, then blew it out slowly. He hadn't planned on becoming so honest this quickly. Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you next March at Saints and Sinners.
Hi, I'm Allison Solomon coming to you from the mountains of North Carolina. I'm going to be reading the beginning of my short story, He Had No Choice. The narrator is David. He had no choice, you explain to our guests who are sipping mimosas and dipping their homemade focaccia bread into olive oil. David had to leave. Here we go, I think. You're going to tell my story. I should stop you, say that I don't want to be the center of attention, and anyway, you have it all wrong. Can't we discuss my dissertation instead? I stay silent and watch you sweep your hair back from your forehead with your fingers to stop it falling over your brow. I feel a mixture of fondness and irritation. Tell us, our guests clamor. You okay with that, you ask me? I nod, even though I know I'll end up feeling like one of those caged toucans we saw on display in the Costa Maya cruise port on our way to Senor Frog, a captive creature, unfamiliar and exotic. His parents wanted him to get married, you say. A collective sigh reverberates around the table. Don't they all? Dante rolls his eyes. But it was different in his case, you say, pausing for effect. It was an arranged marriage. Dante's wine glass is suspended midair, Jonathan's focaccia forgotten, as they turn their heads from one end of the hewn oak table to the other and look at me. He was 18 and... 18? Dante screeches, turning to me. You were just a child. Who gets married at 18? I feel my stomach muscles tighten, hearing the judgment as I've heard it so many times before. In my community, kids don't date, I say. We don't kiss or make out or hold hands. Boys aren't even allowed to look at girls. But we were still like any other horny teenagers, so trust me, by 18 we're more than ready to get married. This is the pattern. I make a joke of it, lighten the mood, let this story unfold as if it doesn't break me apart a little bit more each time. They took him to meet a girl, you explain. His parents were in the living room, and they sat in the kitchen. What was she like? Was she pretty? Were you going to go through with it? They fire questions at me, and I feel as if I'm transitioning from a caged toucan to a captured revolutionary. I didn't look at her. I kept my head down while she served me a cup of lemon tea and rugelach that she'd baked that afternoon. Oh, I love rugelach, Jonathan says. Definitely worth marrying a woman if her rugelach are good enough. The group erupts in laughter as Dante punches his husband lightly on the arm. So then what happened? We sat there in silence for a while. She was waiting for me to open up the conversation, but I didn't know what to say. I pick up the dish of butternut squash and kale strata and push it toward Dante, intimating that everybody should carry on with their meals. As they pass the dish between them, I breathe in the heady, sweet scents from the lilies and roses I cut from our garden this morning, now arranged in a Venetian glass vase on the sideboard. I love this house you and I have built together, with its massive oak beams and natural light streaming in through large, uncovered windows. I relish waking up in the morning to the sound of rain dripping off the trees and watching the early morning fog rise off the mountains. I want to stay in this place, not go back to the boy who lived in a Hasidic Brooklyn neighborhood, and the day he sat nervously at a peeling Formica kitchen table, shuckling back and forth, like a boy on the spectrum rocking, or me reciting my thrice daily prayers. Did you marry her? asks Doug quietly, stirring me from my reverie. Doug grew up Mennonite, and I often feel an affinity with him, even though our backgrounds are so disparate. I shake my head. I considered it. After the first meeting, her parents told my parents she was willing to meet with me again. I thought how nice it would be to have kids of my own, to teach them all our traditions, to be a father. But you're gay! How could you even contemplate it? Doug's boy toy looks indignant, and Doug pats his leg. I knew plenty of guys who got married, even though I was pretty sure they were gay too. None of us said anything, of course. Jerking each other off at yeshiva was commonplace, and you had a feeling who was doing it just for himself and who had something else going on. My best friend had just got engaged, and I thought I would too. The boy toy shakes his head. That's just wrong, he mutters, and I want to slap his pretty little face. That's the end of my segment. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is John Treat, and I'm speaking to you from Seattle. I will read from my short story, Gemus Gets Away. It's set on Gemus Island in Washington State, and in the first weeks of the COVID epidemic. Not everyone on Gemus was the retired rich, or even the working comfortable. By the look of most of the houses, many with sheds or barns long past being useful, some of his neighbors were just scraping by. Best anyone knew, the Samish had been here originally. They camped on Gemus in the winter. The island had a freshwater spring on it. The British sailed past it, but the Spanish named it in honor of a viceroy of Mexico at the end of the 18th century. By the end of the 19th, the US government had seized the spring and sent everyone else packing. Potlatch Beach was deserted. Greg heard someone approach. The sound of a man's heavy boots on rocks. The same sound he must have made a few minutes earlier when there was no one to hear. The man was about 10 years older than he was, and handsome in a way that Greg could appreciate. He was like the high school soccer coach a gay kid would have a crush on before he knew what a crush on another man was. But now it's decades later and he sees him again. The face was strong if lined, the nose and the chin the most prominent features, the hair in place if gray at the temples, short, wide sideburns, the eyes deep set and narrow, but dark blue, even evident at a distance. Clean shaven, but with the dark virile trace of a beard that would sprout back by the end of the day. Lips sealed in an enigmatic smile. The stranger stayed on his rock some 50 feet away, large hands resting at his side, until he raised one to shield his eyes, looking out at the same horizon Greg had been surveying. He turned and nodded, aiming with care. 50 feet suited Greg's shyness just fine. The return nod did nothing to dissuade him of the notion he might have just found his own kind on Gemus. But Greg was not going to speak with the soccer coach. It wasn't the new excuse of social distancing that kept one from making his way over to the other. It was the rock and boulder-strewn beach, which any effort to cross would have had either of them looking too eager to connect. No, that's not quite true, Greg admitted. A man this handsome was sure to possess a past that included other men, lovers found and lost, maybe someone he cared for, but no longer alive. He was likely to be positive, like Steve had been, both lucky enough to have made it to safe ground before the cavalry arrived, but still scarred. None of that would have been part of their first conversation, of course, but soon enough it would have been. and Greg was not eager for it. He concluded on the basis of no evidence that he and the soccer coach were both AIDS widowers, though technically Greg was not. Steve had died a normal way, if a bit young for it. A heart attack on the squash court, a brief ambulance ride to the emergency room, and then the news that only if the doctors had been able to get to him sooner. But their relationship had always been a threesome. The virus was never far away, and Greg would always wonder if a negative lover, not subsisting on meds, might have been able to play squash at the age of 45 without collapsing. Greg and his soccer coach. Here we are, washed up on the rocky shores of a remote island. Next stop, Siberia. They were, he suspected, here for the long haul now. And he decided just that moment, without thinking through all the consequences, that he would stay on Guimas. Trips back to Seattle, and they were sure to happen, would be the weekends away from the home that this island would become. Wherever the soccer coach hailed from, San Francisco, Boise, Tampa, he was here now, and sooner or later, he and Greg would initiate a conversation, briefly awkward, at the gas pump, on the ferry, somewhere, which would continue until the whole ball of string had unraveled, and there was nothing to say that the other hadn't already said, or was just about to. He decided to head home from the beach, but hesitated whether he should wave goodbye to his distant companion when he next looked his way. Greg chose not to and stepped down from his boulder. You can be lonely anywhere, he comforted himself, and not just on an island. Thank you. I'm grateful to Saints and Sinners for including my story in its 2021 fiction anthology. I hope to see all of you in New Orleans in 2022.